serious content warning if you're like squeamish in any way at all.
He's watching me edit all of this. All of it. Is it still on? Oh, crap. NBC Hannibal is a 3-season psychological horror thriller that aired from 2013 to 2015. The show follows titular cannibal and psychiatrist Hannibal Lecter from the perspective of twitchy, unstable FBI agent Will Graham. Rather than a full adaptation of the Hannibal book franchise by Thomas Harris, the show itself takes a bit more of a turn, becoming a loose remix inspired by the event that followed in the books.
The show found decent success at first, with 4.36 million viewers on the first episode and a dedicated fan base of young people, before getting cancelled just after season 3 aired due to low viewership.
Many fans at the time found queer romantic subtext in the show, specifically between Hannibal and Will, which is what I will be analyzing in this video essay. Now, spoiler warning for pretty much the entire show, but especially the episodes Mizumono and Wrath of the Lamb. I will do a summary of the show, more or less, but it won't be super in-depth, so I would suggest this video for people who have seen Hannibal before. If you haven't seen it yet, that's on you for spending the last 9 years living under a rock. I warned you. Brian Fuller first introduced his iterations of Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham, played by Matt Mickelson and Hugh Dancy, to the silver screen in spring of 2013. In episode 1, Aperitif,
we are introduced to Will through a gruesome crime scene where he kills an innocent woman. This turns out to be his vivid imagination, which he uses to empathize with the killers in his cases to figure out how the crime was committed.
The rest of the season centers largely on Will's imaginative abilities attributed to his autism and how they are exploited for the use of FBI cases, despite him telling others that he was reaching a breaking point. Jack sends him to a psychiatrist, Hannibal Lecter, sparking the beginning of Will and Hannibal's friendship.
They develop a sort of twisted friendship, an unprofessional dynamic that crosses the boundaries of psychiatrist and patient, becoming increasingly reliant on each other. Inseparable, even.
Hannibal encourages Will to continue his work for the FBI, further exposing him to the violence which caused his distress. This pushes him to the point of developing viral encephalitis, and Will can no longer trust what is real and what is his imagination. Throughout this first season, we also see the introduction of
Abigail into Hannibal and Will's codependency. Towards the end of episode 1, Will kills the Minnesota Shrike, Garrett Jacob Hobbs, orphaning his only daughter, Abigail Hobbs.
Will, like Abigail, is also curiously alone.
He lives alone, far from any big cities, in his own land. He doesn't have a wife, kids, or parents looking after him. He barely takes care of anyone other than his dogs.
The orphaning of Abigail put a responsibility on Will that he hadn't before. Taking care of someone. Taking care of a daughter. Will stopped being alone now that he had Abigail and Hannibal.
They have a growing obsession with each other as Will's encephalitis and hallucinations worsen. He becomes extremely unreliable under Hannibal's influence, especially as the narrator.
At the end of season 1, after Will has taken up his paternal role as Abigail's father, with Hannibal, might I add,
we all have fathers now.
Hannibal fakes Abigail's death, which we will get to.
Framing Will as her killer, Hannibal has effectively put Will in prison for life, despite his innocence.
In season 2, Will continues to fight for his innocence, insisting that he did not kill Abigail and several other girls attributed to him, despite overwhelming evidence against him. His lawyers plead insanity in his case to avoid the death penalty, successfully keeping him alive, but also discrediting any statements or inquiries about Hannibal that Will brings up. Everyone else can blame it on his insanity. His old friends and co-workers visit him, sometimes give him cases to work on, wrestle with the fact that they should have seen it sooner, or how could you have known? When a new trial is brought up, Hannibal goes to speak for Will's innocence, despite Will's insistence that Hannibal framed him. This goes poorly, and knowing the judge has Will's life in his hands, Hannibal kills the judge, hanging him up in the style of the Chesapeake Ripper, providing new evidence of a Ripper crime, and proving Will couldn't be the Ripper. Although, this isn't entirely true. At this point, about halfway through season 2, Will's transformation had already begun and was well on its way. Simply the effect of his exposure and obsession with Hannibal. Although he hadn't killed the judge or the victims of the Ripper, Will had mustered up the courage, nerve, or stupidity to send someone after Hannibal instead, taking revenge on him for once. The victim strikes back. A worker at the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane,
Matthew Brown, admired the crimes he thought Will committed, going as far as to do what Will requested of him: kill Hannibal Lecter.
Obviously, this ends up unsuccessful.
Hannibal is found by Crawford before any real damage can be done, and Brown is shot in the chest. Hannibal maintains his life outside, a little shaken up, telling his co-workers how tragic it was that a friend like Will would try to kill him.
Bear in mind, Will was only in prison for about 2 months. Throughout this time, Hannibal has been eating away at Will's thoughts, ruining his perceptions of reality, so much so that he sent someone out to kill him. But once released, Will comes back to him, seemingly friends again. He wants to resume his therapy. Now, this is under the pretense that he's working for Crawford and the FBI, gathering intel about Hannibal by pretending to be his friend. And, to some extent, he follows this plan. The FBI does receive information about Hannibal, providing evidence for his arrest, as they, especially Jack Crawford, slowly become more suspicious of him. Will is useful in this way. However, Will also becomes closer with, changed by, Hannibal. Hannibal and Will's relationship at this point is hard to describe, something obviously non-platonic, but at the same time not quite romantic. Will is torn between whether to continue working with the FBI or warn Hannibal of the FBI's plans, something he subtly suggests but never outwardly states to Hannibal.
The orchestrations of carbon.
Hannibal also hints at the temporary nature of their relationship via comparing themselves to simple orchestrations of carbon, foreshadowing how quickly they both disappear in the last episode. Death is not something that Hannibal fears. Will, however, is haunted by it. His first killing in the show was Abigail's father, Garrett Jacob Hobbs. Since that point, Will has been haunted by his hallucinations of a stag man and a literal stag, nicknamed the Nightmare Stag. The stag man is in the shape of Hannibal.
I know what kind of crazy I am, and this isn't that kind of crazy. This could be seizures. This could be a tumor. A blood clot.
I can recommend a neurologist.
This is, obviously, a thinly veiled metaphor for Hannibal's murderous influence on Will. The stag follows him home, inside his house. They show up in his nightmares. Will couldn't stop thinking about Hannibal and murder. It follows him everywhere. At this point in season 2, Will's encephalitis has gotten more or less better, being largely ignorable.
He rarely sees the stag anymore because he's more or less stopped hallucinating regularly. But as Will leaves the house, he sees the stag for the first time in a while. And as he tries to get up to try and shoot the stag, hitting it in the side, Garrett Jacob Hobbs comes back to him saying, "See? See?" The same thing that he said to him when he died.
I believe Will understands what he meant by see at this point. He didn't kill the stag when he shot at it, he left it breathing. He wanted Hannibal to escape. He wanted to join him. Hannibal is also shown to have the upper hand visually, despite Will thinking he doesn't know about the FBI's plan to catch him.
When in Hannibal's office, Hannibal is placed above Will, momentarily standing above him on the bookcase. Once down from the bookcase, he is shot from a low angle, making him seem taller, whereas Will is often shot from a high angle,
to make him seem short. This suggests a general power imbalance noticed throughout the course of their relationship. Psychiatrist and patient, savior and victim, serial killer and FBI agent, free man and prisoner. Hannibal often has the upper hand.
Resuming therapy after Will's acquittal is not him giving in, but attempting to take hold of the wheel in both their relationship and his life in mind. Will is the one interested in Hannibal now. He wants to know and understand him. Hannibal is the one letting him, later re-establishing his supremacy when Will doesn't appreciate his gift, which is knowledge, and uses it against him. It's hard to catch a fish that once got off your hook, but Will didn't get off. He's caught. Hannibal simply lets him move around like a dog on a leash.
However, notably, Will isn't the supposed weak one all the time, despite his unreliability as narrator. There are obvious power plays that Hannibal has made on Will, such as framing him for murder and putting him in prison. Hannibal, undeniably, has more physical and logistical power, but Will has made irreversible changes upon Hannibal too. Hannibal can't kill Will because he needs him. No one knows him like Will does.
Will is best compared to a wolf, raised by people who thought he was a dog, or rather, begged him to be a dog. Don't kill me, please. I raised you. You're a good boy, aren't you? So now he only lives in the tracks of other wolves while he's stuck amongst dogs. His entire arc revolves around how Hannibal tries to lift Will to live alongside him.
Hannibal undoubtedly has more power than Will, which he uses to raise Will to his level, but Will was never fully defenseless. To me, Hannibal's dinner parties are one of the more obvious displays of his desire, especially towards the end of season 2. Hannibal pours hours into butchering, preparing, cooking, and plating these extravagant meals made of and for people, particularly focusing on Will, even if others are present. Cannibalism as a metaphor for love. The camera lingers on their faces, their fingertips, and their lips, each gazing at each other when they are alone together, the only time that they can really be intimate. Hannibal admits to having what he calls an imago of Will, which he describes as an image of a loved one buried in one's subconscious, trying to prompt Will into admitting he has one of him too. Hannibal is essentially admitting that he thinks about Will, that he recognizes now how Will has changed him, and that he wants confirmation from Will that he has been changed too. Hannibal also explicitly suggests that him and Will should run away together, a common trope in queer media.
We could disappear now. Tonight. Feed your dogs. Leave a note for Alana and never see her or Jack again.
The idea of leaving it all behind is alluring. Running to a place where no one knows you or your history is tantalizing.
We've seen it before in other queer shows. In Our Flag Means Death, Blackbeard and Stede Bonnet make plans to run away to somewhere remote where they can live together in peace, leaving behind Stede's wife and kids.
Maybe we can just get away, start over, reset. You said there was no escape. There's always an escape. We could be gone tonight. What about the English? They'll be all over us. No. We could get a new boat, new names, new backstories, everything. We'll go somewhere they'll never find us.
In Good Omens, Crowley tries to get Aziraphale to run away with him as well.
It's a big universe. Even if this all ends up in a puddle of burning goo, we can go off together.
Go off together?
The trope is a staple in contemporary queer media.
But Hannibal cannot run away with Will, not yet. So instead, he cooks. When Hannibal cooks, he cooks not just for himself and Will to eat, but to give Will some part of himself. A unique creation of his own he wants Will to consume, they become literally connected. The meals are theatrical, avant-garde, almost dreamlike. Hannibal calls the lambs they're eating sacrificial. Lambs represent innocence and purity, with their white coat and being freshly born, barely experiencing the world. This could be a metaphor for Abigail coming back and subsequently being killed in the Mizumono bloodbath. Oblivious and unassuming. The sacrifice of a child, Will's child, as a trade for allowing Will to survive.
Will calls Hannibal on his landline before Jack Crawford arrives at his house, despite him working for the FBI against Hannibal this whole time. He calls him with a simple warning: they know.
They know copies what Hannibal calls Garrett Jacob Hobbs to warn him about. Will is emulating Hannibal now, becoming him, or at the very least, cares about him. This doesn't necessarily work as planned.
Crawford came over to Hannibal's for dinner under the pretense that Hannibal did not know of the plan to arrest or kill him, and after the fight ensued, Crawford was left for dead.
By the time Will had arrived, Crawford had been hidden and dying, Abigail had come out of hiding and pushed Alana Bloom out of a window.
Alana had been romantically involved with both Hannibal and Will, though with Hannibal to a further extent. She'd also cared for Abigail immediately after her parents were killed, acting as a mother to her. When Abigail pushed Alana out of a window, she rejected her maternity.
Their relationship as mother and daughter had been effectively erased. Will expected not to see Hannibal still in his kitchen by the time he arrived at his house. After all, his call was a warning. Get out, they know what you're doing, you need to leave. The moment he sees Hannibal, he says, "You were supposed to leave," almost reluctantly.
Will knew Hannibal was dangerous firsthand. He knew telling him to leave was wrong because it enabled him to continue harming Will and harming others. Why else would he have advocated for his arrest so strongly?
But Will could never allow Hannibal to be arrested. His bond with Hannibal was too strong now, he could never bring himself to kill him. Hannibal responds to him, "We couldn't leave without you." Undeniably, Hannibal is smart. He's educated, he knew the FBI was onto him, and he should have been wise enough to leave before he could get caught. Except he has one key flaw. He needs Will.
Just like how Will couldn't kill Hannibal despite every horrible incriminating thing that he had done, Hannibal couldn't leave without Will by his side. He couldn't exist without Will now.
He even saved Abigail for him. Hannibal not leaving also goes back to what he said a few scenes before this during dinner, when he suggested he and Will run away together. Him saving Abigail, faking her death, and telling Will that they couldn't leave without him
shows the plans that Hannibal made for them to run away together. It was never theoretical in his mind. He wanted to share life with Will that wasn't possible for them in Baltimore.
Hannibal knew how Will cared for Abigail, how she made him feel like a father. Therefore, she was bait for him to run away with Hannibal. The euphoria of Will finally being reunited with Abigail after thinking she was dead for so many months did not last long. Although Will couldn't let Hannibal be arrested or killed by the FBI without intervening and protecting him, Hannibal could.
After so many months of building up trust, eating dinner together and spending time together, Will betrayed him. Hannibal was hurt.
He had to punish Will. An eye for an eye is only fair. Unlike Will, Hannibal's morals and his sense of justice came before the people he loved. So he decided to take away two of the things Will could have closest to him: Abigail and himself. In the final moments of Season 2, Hannibal stabs Will in the gut, slits Abigail's throat, leaving them to die together. He leaves Crawford and Alana to die elsewhere and runs away to Italy with Bedelia to avoid arrest. Before Hannibal stabbed Will, he put his hand to Will's face, caressing him, holding him. He craved this life with Will. He wanted this closeness and intimacy, probably in another situation. It seemed to me like he wanted to soften the blow of, or possibly show a small sign of remorse for what he was about to do to him. Hannibal stabs Will in the gut with a curved linoleum knife, presumably to cause more pain and internal damage. He buckles over and Hannibal holds him in an embrace, mirrored in the finale. These two actions are in stark contrast, one an act of hatred and the other an act of love. Hannibal was conflicted, betrayed. He did this to let go of what he loved, Will and the life he pictured for them both.
The place was made for Abigail and your world.
Hannibal often talks about his vivid imagination in earlier episodes. He remembered the buildings and churches of Florence in outstanding visual detail years after he saw them, so it was no surprise that he wanted to build a place for himself and Will, whether it be in the real world or his mind. When Hannibal said the place was made for Abigail and your world, he is talking about a space in his mind. He added rooms for Will and Abigail and a stream for fishing in his memory palace after Will suggested adding a stream to it in an earlier episode. Hannibal was making space for Will and Abigail to live full-time in his mind, as he had hoped in real life they would live together as a family. When Hannibal says, "And you wanted to surprise me," he has reckoned with the fact that Will has betrayed him. But Hannibal was cocky, overconfident. He naively assumed Will was devoted to his side of seeing things.
I let you know me. See me.
Hannibal felt that because the gift he had given Will, the gift of truth about his cannibalism, the gift of knowledge, was left unaccepted, Will couldn't accept him either. Hannibal is used to being othered. In the show, he is odd, theatrical character. He is European, stereotypically femme. In terms of otherness, he is starkly different from most of the other characters on Hannibal. Pushing Will away at the end is his way of protecting himself emotionally after such a betrayal.
Do you believe you could change me? The way I've changed you.
I already did.
Will manages to croak something out after Hannibal stabbed him, talking to him. I already did. Hannibal likes to gloat about how he has changed Will. He often uses the metaphor of a teacup shattering to represent something that can't be put back together, just like Will after he caused so much pain towards him. Fate and circumstance have returned us to this moment. When the teacup shatters, Hannibal says. But Will knows he has changed Hannibal, that Hannibal cannot live without Will playing some role in his life now. This is some, even if a small semblance of power Will has over him.
I forgive you, Will. Will you forgive me?
Taking away Abigail was one of the last actions that Hannibal had planned to do to Will. Will was alone, even more alone than the average person. He had no close friends, no family to visit him, no kids. Abigail allowed Will to take care of someone other than himself or his dogs, to have someone reliant on him for once. Someone he and Hannibal almost loved. He felt responsible for her even if she wasn't really his daughter.
Fatherhood is key in Will and Hannibal's relationship, especially with Abigail. Hannibal offers her a false sense of protection, using her for his own needs, while Will truly wants to take care for her.
By taking Abigail away from Will for good, Hannibal took away his last chance at fatherhood, erasing some part of him that he had grown to love or at least accommodate. He also took away physical manifestation of their relationship, their child. But Will fought to at least try and save what he had left. Both him and Abigail were bleeding profusely, fatally, if left too long. Hannibal painted death as peaceful and quiet. He urged Will to stop fighting against him, rather go back to the memory palace he created for them both, with the stream running through the center for Will.
You can make it all go away. Put your head back. Close your eyes. Wade into the quiet of the stream.
Hannibal didn't want him to save Abigail. It would be easier for him to let her just slip away. Despite his injuries, despite still being on the ground, he reached over and tried to apply pressure to Abigail's wound, a desperate attempt to save both her and the relationship he had developed with Hannibal and Abigail. It was largely in vain, and with the death of Abigail comes the near death of the nightmare stag.
When Hannibal leaves his house for the last time, Will, lying wounded on the floor, sees the stag dying beside him. Hannibal has cut their connection. Abigail, who can be considered a representation of Will's slight influence on Hannibal, isn't there anymore either. Will is on his own.
Although the stag was left alive, alluding to the rebuilding of their relationship later on, Will is left alone for the time being. The stag dies with him and Abigail in the kitchen. Wrath of the Lamb is the 13th episode of Season 3, or the final episode of Hannibal. Years after the events of Mizumono, Hannibal ran off to Italy and later turned himself back into the police because he realized Will didn't want him in his life. Will spends the next 3 years without Hannibal, rebuilding his life, reintegrating with society, meeting his wife Molly, and raising her son Wally. When a new killer emerges in Baltimore, the Red Dragon, or Francis Dollarhide, who I'll be referring to as Dollarhide throughout this, the FBI needs someone to catch him, so they call back Will. His first plan ends up maiming the head of the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, Frederick Chilton, when the killer went after him instead of Will. So he creates a second plan, a staged escape of Hannibal from prison in order to attract Dollarhide to him, allowing the FBI to catch him once and for all. When Will goes to the prison to talk to Hannibal, he doesn't see him in the prison cell, not at first. He pictures them alone together in the church in Florence, how he remembers Hannibal. He doesn't see Hannibal in his prison uniform, rather a tailored suit similar to what Hannibal wore in seasons 1 and 2. This shows that Will still has respect for Hannibal, or at least some kind of caring for their past. He doesn't want to picture him in prison. Why would he, after Hannibal and him were friends for so long? Seeing Hannibal reminds him of his life 3 years before, when they were so close. Will does like his life with his family, though. But it's monotonous, repetitive. It doesn't compare to the same highs and lows of life when he was with Hannibal.
It won't be the same. You'll see it's not the same.
Will rejoining the FBI momentarily to catch Dollarhide reignites a certain passion he had for the field in the first place. It lets him back into the danger zone. He is left vulnerable. The only reason he was able to rebuild his life over the past 3 years without Hannibal was by not thinking about him. But now, back in the field where he used to work with Hannibal 3 years prior, he can't resist thinking about him, how life used to be with him. It won't be the same now that he remembers. He will drown in thoughts of Hannibal. Water is another metaphor often overlooked in Hannibal. From what I've heard from one of my sources, Leon, the water represents Will's bloodlust, something he always was capable of, but never considered a social possibility. Many times in seasons 1 and 2, Will would have nightmares of drowning, wake up covered in sweat, standing in streams. His alarm clock would melt into a puddle. But Will has been clean of crime or being framed for crimes for years at this point, and has generally steered away from it even in the case of solving crimes. At this point in the season, he has been very dry. So when Dollarhide sneaks up and knocks Will out, only to wake him up by splashing water on him, it represents crime coming back into his world. His bloodlust is coming back now that Hannibal is too. Dollarhide is just reminding him of this, reigniting his transformation. Will also refuses eye contact with anyone except Hannibal. This has been fairly consistent throughout the series. In the beginning of the show, Will describes eye contact as distracting, which is a trait of his autism. He avoids eye contact with Crawford and Bedelia, but because of his closeness with him, he accepts eye contact with Hannibal, one of the only people he does this with. One would assume that after 3 years without Hannibal, this closeness would be lost, especially with what happened during Mizumono when Hannibal gutted Will. But he continues to make eye contact with Hannibal as though making up for lost time. They catch up quickly in this episode, once again becoming close. The dialogue changes from clinical, observational statements about Hannibal in the beginning of this episode and in prior ones to conversational, less hostile tones. When Will talks about Hannibal to others, he seems to favor Hannibal, care about him more.
You will hardly be caught a second time.
I don't intend Hannibal to be caught a second time.
Is your wife aware of how intimately you and Hannibal know each other?
She's aware enough. I need you, Hannibal.
Hannibal is able to make jokes with him again, able to talk like old times. Their friendship has been reinstated. And by the time they reach the house on the cliffside, they spend their time sipping wine together and chatting. It is implied that they talk
Or do other things.
for hours when the background lighting goes from late afternoon to night in the time that they were in the cliff house. Will remarks that he thinks that they're being watched, and as soon as Hannibal agrees, Dollarhide shoots through a window and hits Hannibal in the lower back. He monologues for a bit, I assume, to buy time for Will and to let Will create a plan to kill Dollarhide. Hannibal says, "No greater love hath man than to lay down his life for a friend," which could mean both how him and Will sacrificed Dollarhide, therefore laying down his life for them, or how Hannibal is laying down his life in that moment so that Will can plan. Either way, Hannibal implies that there is some type of love behind the action. But Will does not act fast enough. Dollarhide stabs Will in the face near his jaw and in his shoulder before Hannibal jumps on him and pries Dollarhide off Will. Hannibal and Will stole a police car to get to the cliff house, and theoretically they would have guns, which would be significantly more effective in killing Dollarhide. But this was meant to be more ritual, a becoming for Will. Dollarhide is shown with dragon wings as he turns to attack Hannibal instead, which shows the dragon taking over, possessing him. It does not take long for Will and Hannibal to strike back. Will stabs Dollarhide twice before Hannibal holds him back so that Will can stab him again and tear out his throat with his teeth.
Guys, this is me, editing. I'm watching the clip back, and I just realized that it's Hannibal that does that, and I've watched this 6 times and never noticed that, so I was wrong.
An axe to chop firewood stood nearby, which would have been more convenient, but this isn't in line with the transformation Will is having. After spending time with Hannibal throughout the day, killing Dollarhide is the final stage of this transformation. He becomes one with Hannibal. They do this with no less than a look, an instant connection and understanding that doesn't need words. As Dollarhide dies, the paintings of the Great Red Dragon burn, and Dollarhide's wings become engulfed in flames, a cathartic release from the dragon. Despite having been killed, this feels more like a release than a murder. Dollarhide doesn't look unhappy, rather blissful, as blood spreads across the pavement frame like wings and music swells.
Will's part in killing Dollarhide comes out of his own free will to live, but also partially for his own enjoyment. Hannibal doesn't let go of Will till the very end, not only figuratively, but he isn't the one in charge of the action anymore. He lets Will flourish, lets him flare, and in the very end, in every way imaginable, allows him to take control of their ultimate downfall.
The choice of song during this scene, Love Crime by Susie Suze, was created specifically with this end scene in mind. Love Crime plays like a love song, with the title alluding that all the crimes they'd committed together had been for love.
But a blood red setting sun, rushing through my veins, burning up my skin, love cry.
The song is slow, atmospheric, intimate, and morbid, matching the pacing and themes of the scene. The morbidity carries over into the end of the show itself. Hannibal grabs Will's hand to get him off the floor and hoists him up next to him.
This is all I ever wanted for you, Will. For both of us.
Will finally understands what Hannibal means when he says this. They lean into each other, their faces near touching, becoming one, an almost kiss. This marks the end of Will's transformation. All Hannibal had wanted was for him to understand what it felt like to kill, to understand the power he could come into, and now he had finally reached it. The teacup had shattered.
It's beautiful.
When Will finally acknowledges what Hannibal says, he finally genuinely means it. The lyrics of the song start playing in the background as they embrace openly, Hannibal finding Will's waist and Will holding onto Hannibal's shoulder. Will leans his head on the other shoulder, and with one swift movement of his arm around Hannibal's head, he pushes them both into the sea, where they disappear into nowhere. Will's transformation is complete. He goes from waking up in pools of sweat to becoming the ocean, becoming the same as Hannibal. Though Hannibal and Will never explicitly show their love for each other through a kiss or other forms of intimacy, I don't believe it is needed in order to show how they feel about each other. Their love is emotional and psychological rather than affectionate and romantic. That is to say, their relationship is also highly flawed. They constantly manipulate each other, hurt each other and those close to them. It was never meant to last. They never would have worked out. And this doesn't make the show queerbaiting. Hannibal isn't a romance, it's a crime drama. Their love and relationships with each other and other characters simply isn't the main focus of the plot. The queer subtext is there, and while it may be subtext, that is the point. It's not meant to take the front seat. And personally, I don't think Hannibal and Will would show their love as a kiss. Their dinners felt more intimate than any kiss could be. That is also why I think this show had a perfect ending. Let's say, theoretically, they survived the fall. The FBI would be after Hannibal, and Will would go back to his normal life with his wife and kid. But, like Hannibal said, it would never be the same for Will. He could never go back to normal life where he just feeds his dogs and makes dinner for his wife and drives to the grocery store. Hannibal changed him too much. Them diving off the cliff together seems natural, a release of all transformation that had built up over the years. It was intimate. They were bound together in the end, bound together forever. And I wouldn't have it any other way.
Okay, I just wanted to go off script for once and just say some things. So I'm gonna say some thank yous and other things. But yeah, just without a script for once, genuine. I didn't have a mic for this. I mean, I did, but it didn't connect to my phone, which is what I was filming with. So, yeah, that's where the audio is kind of odd at the beginning. If you're noticing a blurred thing in the background, it's because I realized I shouldn't have put that in the background and I wanted to cover it up, but I'd already done half the filming, so I was like, okay, whatever, I'm just keeping it. Okay, and now for some thank yous. First of all, thank you, whoever watched the video to this end. Genuinely, from my heart, thank you, because this is my first video, and it's I put a lot of work into this. So, yeah, I mean, I'd love to create more, and I'm totally open to feedback and everything, or other things that people would want me to analyze if you want me to. Yeah, I would be down for that. Thank you. And also thank you to my friends, specifically the people who voiced the quotes for this video. So Dennis, Carlotta, Susan, Branson, thank you for recording them. And Susan, thank you for recording twice because I forgot to record one quote. Thank you to my sources, Leon and my anonymous friend, and also Hart. There are metaphors that I wouldn't have noticed at all if you hadn't been there, so just thank you. Thank you to Carlotta and Dennis and Erica for getting me into Hannibal in the first place. And also thank you to my personal project supervisor, Miss Tether, because you've just been so supportive throughout everything. I can't thank you enough. Yeah, thank you all. I'm gonna put some more video essays that you should watch if you want to look more on this topic just after this.